everyone, and welcome to our meeting of the Task Force on Cannabis-Derived Intoxicants and Illegal Cannabis Production, also known as the HB 3000 Task Force for shortcuts. Today's August 25th, and it's 3 p.m., and I am Pam Marsh, and I am calling this meeting to order. So we will start today, as we always do, with a roll call vote to see who's here. And if you want to indicate how you are participating, that is via video or audio, that would be helpful too. So Amanda, thank you.
Yep. Senator Przanski.
Excused.
Senator Hansel.
Excused.
Representative Marsh.
Here, by operating by video.
Representative Morgan.
I see Representative Morgan waving at us.
Sorry, I'm trying to get my mic unmuted.
Okay, she's clearly here.
I'm here by video. Thank you.
Thank you. Rob Bovett.
Here by video.
Great. Scott Winkles.
Here by video.
Sheriff Stickler.
Here by video.
Courtney Moran. She just came in.
Courtney, are you here?
Courtney Moran.
Present by video, thank you.
Matt Cyrus. I don't see him yet. Jay Noller.
Present by video.
Amanda Metzler.
Present by video.
Brent Kenyon.
Present by video.
Lauren Henderson.
Present by audio.
Andre Urso. Didn't see him yet either. Steve Marks. Steve will be joining us, but he's not on yet either. Josh Eastman.
Here by video.
Oh, there he is. Good. Thanks, Steve.
And Josh, you sort of, yeah.
Here by video, sorry.
All good.
Amanda Krause. All right, and we're doing roll call. Andre, I saw you just joined.
Present.
Hello, Lloyd Przanski is on by phone.
Oh, great. Thank you, Senator.
Sorry, I'm on transit from Salem back to Eugene.
Okay, great. Thank you for joining us.
Yes.
Jake Johnstone has changed positions within Water Resources, and so we have Justin Dillon here today.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Present by video.
Amanda Swanson.
Present by video.
And Tyler Bechtel.
Here by video.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. Justin, since you're new to our ranks, why don't you take a minute and just introduce yourself a little bit?
Thank you, Rep. Yeah, thank you, Rep Marsh. As indicated, my name is Justin Dillon. I actually have moved into the position with the Oregon Water Resources Department, previously held by Jake Johnstone as the Southwest Region Manager. So I have District 13, 14, and 15, which includes Jackson, Josephine, Douglas, Coos, and Curry counties. Happy to be here. Great.
Happy to have you. Jake says you are well acclimated to discussing water and hemp.
Yes, we're quite busy with it. Excited to be here.
Great, thank you. So this is about I'm going to say about the fourth task force meeting that we've had. We are an active task force. We have 3 subcommittees. We will hear quick updates on the subcommittees later in the meeting, but we wanted to really reserve the bulk of our time today to start looking at the issues around the regulatory system to see if we want to recommend any changes to the way we regulate hemp and cannabis in the state of Oregon. And to do that, we thought it would be helpful to go out to some of our neighbors down south at the state of Oregon to hear more about how they are choosing to organize themselves to regulate some of the sticky wickets that we're all coming up against in the hemp field. So we're going to start with that presentation today. We've moved the reports from the field and the reports from our subcommittees later in the agenda to make sure that we have plenty of time to hear from California and talk about what kinds of lessons we might take from that. So with that, I am going to invite Amir Javad. Amir, forgive me if I butchered your name. And my understanding is you're with the California Department of Public Health, and you're going to talk to us about AB 45, the structure and the implementation that presented in your state.
Yes, that's correct.
So with that, take it away, Amir.
All right, sounds good. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Amar Javed. I'm the Chief of the Food Safety Enforcement Unit within the California Department of Public Health. Prior to this position, I used to coordinate all the MEFREPS activities. Those of you that have not heard, it basically stands for Manufactured Food Regulatory Program Standards, which is federal standards that I used to coordinate for the state prior to taking over as the Food Safety Enforcement Unit. What is my background with industrial hemp? When I started working with the enforcement team, IH started becoming a hot topic. So when I refer to IH, I'm referring to industrial hemp. It started becoming a hot topic because we started getting inquiries and questions regarding industrial hemp from counties that have because the way the system is broken up in the state of California, the retail industry is regulated by the local health departments, and the wholesale and distribution is regulated at the state level. So we started getting inquiries for all these products that was popping up with CBD within the state. And then prior to that, in this role, I had assisted our new cannabis program with the development of their, not just their regulatory structure, but also the inspection and enforcement structure. So when these inquiries started coming in and we started looking into it, we started realizing that there was a pretty big problem, because basically what started to happen was a lot of the operators that were manufacturing cannabis products started to advertise them as industrial hemp. They were making industrial hemp products too, but they were trying to exploit an industry that had not been heavily regulated yet, because by the time we started getting all these inquiries, cannabis had already been legalized and was starting to get regulated. That's when we started. So once we understood the scope of issues that were the food industry or the consumer were facing in the state of California, we started regulating and started doing enforcement. And we started embargoing products because CBD from industrial hemp was not approved as a food ingredient. So it was an unapproved food additive. This led to our very first bill that was introduced. I don't know if you ever heard of AB 228. That was the very first bill that got introduced into legislation. And basically what it was a very brief bill, 4 simple lines, and basically they were introduced to change our statute and incorporate all components of industrial hemp as legalized food ingredients. Going back and forth, it took about a year, but the bill didn't go anywhere. It did not pass. After that bill came another bill. Same kind of situation. It was a lot more extensive because the initial bill did not address any of the safety issues concerning industrial hemp. So we went back, like I said, we have highlighted a lot of issues with that particular bill. So it seemed like the second bill that came was addressing a lot of the issues that we have highlighted, but that bill also did not pass. And then finally, AB 45, which was built on the previous 2 bills, did pass in 2021. So it passed in October of 2021. And once it passed, it went into effect immediately. So it was one of those bills that did not have a window that allowed or that gave us the regulatory agencies to acclimate and develop outreach and all that kind of stuff before it goes into effect, so that before the enforcement could take place. It went into effect immediately, but it allowed the industry 90 days of grace period to come into compliance, and basically prohibited all the regulatory agencies from doing any enforcement for at least 90 days. So what did the bill do? So basically what the bill did was it legalized all parts of industrial hemp as food ingredients, cosmetics, and pet food, and inhalable in the state of California, with the exception of THC. So of course, THC was, it prohibited THC, and it also prohibited industrial hemp in certain products. So the products that it prohibited, any derivative from IH and were, so they included medical devices, prescription and over-the-counter drugs, also prohibit them in nicotine and tobacco products, also prohibit them in animal feed. So you cannot add IH to animal feed or any derivative of IH into animal feed. And then it also prohibited IH products in alcoholic beverages. So those are the items that could not contain IH derivatives. It did give the department the authority to come up with the regulations. We also identified additional products where we wanted to prohibit any IH derivatives. So basically gave CDPH the authority to come up with a registration structure and a regulatory structure to regulate the industry and enforce any of the laws that were any of the AB 45 laws. The other thing it did was it excluded grass. Those of you that are not aware, generally recognized as safe ingredients that are that FDA puts out. So if anything FDA designate as grass, it excluded from the bill. So basically those could be regulated as normal products. So the FDA had already designated the hemp seed oil, and hemp seed protein as grass. So it exempted them from AB 45 provisions. So they could be regulated as normal food. The other thing the law did, it allowed us to adopt and enforce any of the federal regulations that were already in play for a lot of the different commodities for different food products throughout the United States. So such as 21 CFR 117 for normal foods, simply adopted that for enforcement under regular food products. Dietary supplement GMPs, juice HACCP, seafood HACCP. The other thing it also allowed us give us the authority to come up with the regulation to adopt additional regulation, federal regulation, that did not come across as GMPs, okay, such as the low acid canned food or acidified food, because it did not prohibit IH in those commodities. So we're in the process of developing additional regulations to cover additional regulation from the federal CFRs, but they're still in the works. But it did give us quite a bit of authority with existing GMPs that were already in play for different food products. The other thing it did, it created a structure for IH raw plant to move across state lines. So the companies here in California can purchase, we already know this legalized at the federal level, but now any entities can purchase raw material from any state or any country that has an approved IH program and process those into products here in California. So you can do extraction from it, you can incorporate it as ingredient into any of the commodities that are allowed in the state of California. The other thing, nice thing about the bill was that it didn't just exclude THC. It also covered other derivatives that were coming up while the bill was going through the process. So it covered Delta 8, not just Delta 9, it covered Delta 8, Delta 10, and any other intoxicating cannabinoids that may be identified in the future. So it gave us the authority to come up with the regulations if we do identify any additional cannabinoids that may be intoxicated, that may cause intoxication. And the other thing that it gives authority for was to set age requirements for sale of IH products. Okay, so age requirements and also the serving sizes. So it gave us the authority to come up with those regulations. So that is something that is in the works currently. So we're setting up serving size and age limitation for IH products. And then the one of the unique things with this particular bill is that any of the food products that contain IH derivatives have to be prepackaged and shelf stable. So you cannot include IH derivatives or a CBD or extracted cannabinoids in any of the perishable products. So they have to be prepackaged and have to be shelf stable, which is very unique to food under AB 45. Does not have the same provision for cosmetics, inhalable, and the so those are the other commodities that were allowed under the AB 45 to include IH derivatives. The other thing it did was it created a so on cannabis side, there's a track and trace system where it is tracked from seed to sale. So everything gets tracked. On the IH side, we do not have the track and trace. But what it did was it created a certificate analysis type of system where it was mandated any finished product to have certain information on the label, such as a barcode or a scan code or a QR code, where you can easily pull out your phone and basically scan it and be able to look up the COA, basically all the testing that's been done on that particular product, including all the THC, the cannabinoids, the contaminants. Now, what it did with the contaminants, it set the same standard of testing as it is for cannabis. So it did not differentiate. So whatever the cannabis gets tested for as far as contaminants are concerned, it's at the same standard for industrial hemp. It required the labs to be ISO accredited in order for it to perform testing. Okay, so the results that the companies have to supply to us for the products they manufacture has to come from ISO accredited ISO 17025, or they have to be licensed by Department of Cannabis Control in the state of California. Under the Department of Cannabis Control, they also require ISO accreditation for their laboratories, but they also get licensed by the cannabis controlled if they're going to test any of the cannabis products. The other thing the law did, it required some additional labeling and advertising restrictions on products. So such as, you cannot have any untrue statements or any health claims that are not, justified through research. Okay. Also, set limits on who they can advertise these products to. So the products cannot be targeted to children, pregnant women, or breastfeeding person. So it cannot be targeted. It cannot target those populations. Okay. And then it gave us the enforcement authority to embargo, seize, do recalls, suspend any of the license and registration that will be issued to these companies, and also gave us the authority to inspect any financial and personnel data with these firms. Under our normal law, we do not have the authority to audit personnel data and sales data and financial data. But this particular law was unique and it gave us that authority. Okay. So that is a large overview of the highlights of AB 45. Now, it set the standard, right? It gave us the authority to create the registration system and the inspection system. So under that, we realized that we needed to create like 7 different categories of licenses. Okay. Now, not licenses, I should say authorization. So basically, it gave us the authority to create an enrollment and oversight of IH firms. Okay, that is what it's called. It's an authorization. But you cannot get that authorization independently. It is associated with the baseline licenses that we issue to our manufacturers here in California, such as for normal food products, cosmetics, and inhalables. So anybody who's seeking IH authorization, they must apply for the baseline permit before they can apply for the authorization itself. So 7 different categories. So we have one. The other thing they set a requirement for, which is also unique to California, any extractors. So it doesn't matter where they're located, out of state or in state, they must be licensed by California in order for them to supply the extracts to the manufacturers here in California. I don't know how that's going to be enforced. It's going to be very difficult when it's outside the state of California. It gave us It did give us the authority to travel and collect per diem costs if we have to go inspect and audit them. Okay, but we'll see how that works out because the program is brand new, the law is brand new, so we don't know what the field is going to look like as we move forward. But we do have that authority under the law. So extractor, doesn't matter where they manufacture it, must be licensed in order for their products to be available in California. Any other products, if the manufacturer's here, they have to be licensed here. If the manufacturer outside of California, there's no restriction on them sending IH products into California and selling them here. So I think that's a little bit of a loophole. So we'll see how that works out. So what did we do? We created, we developed the fee regulations. We developed or modified our existing applications for different licenses. And we created the enrollment and oversight authorization document or application that the firms must complete with the baseline permit application for submission. So once they were all done, we published them. So they got published on July 5th of 2022. So law passed in October 2021, gave them 90 days for companies to come into compliance, and that occurred in January of 2022. It took us quite a bit of time to come up with to develop the regulation for fee structure and applications, and also modify our existing application and develop the authorization applications. So once they were published on July 5th, we're ready to roll. Basically, we're open for business. So one of the things along the way we developed inspection checklist for our staff. We developed trainings based on the existing regulations that we have for different commodities, and also the training for AB 45 provisions. So we created those inspection tools for our staff. We developed trainings, we delivered the trainings, and basically rolled out the program. And currently we're accepting application and we're processing applications. There are a lot of things that we're learning in the process because this is a brand new program for state of California, of course. And we're learning a lot of lessons. One of the things we did because of that, there's so many questions coming across pertaining to licensing and the operation themselves and the regulations themselves. We set up an in-house subject matter experts and created an ongoing group to address those concerns and questions in coordination with our legal department. I know there are going to be cleanup bills coming forward like over the next year or two. And they may change the law a little bit because we're already realizing some of the drawbacks. But one of the things that we're going to start doing is as the extractors get approved, we're going to start publishing their information on our website. So if they're in state or out of state. So those are some of the things that we're doing here in California. We are also in the process of developing additional regs. So as I mentioned earlier, we have authority to develop different regulations. The highest priority right now is serving sizes and age limits. And then the next one we're going to work on is additional manufacturing, record keeping, and enforcement regulations that we're going to work on. After that, we're going to work on additional testing requirements because right now the law gives us authority to pretty much enforce everything that's for cannabis, but eventually we want to have our own testing standards. So we're going to be working on those as well. So we have multiple regulation packages into play, but those are the two that are the highest of importance right now. So that's what's occurring in California at this time.
That was a great summary. And you sound busy down there.
Very busy.
I have a couple questions and then we'll open it up. One is, what do you do about Delta 8 down there?
So Delta 8, very interesting. It is an unapproved food additive. It is a controlled substance. So our plan is to, once we start doing enforcement, once this complaints start coming in, we will take enforcement and embargo the products as illegal products or adulterated products because it is not approved as an ingredient.
Okay. And then the other question I have is just in terms of the regulatory system as a whole. So does your Department of Ag regulate the product until some point in which public health gets involved, and how do you define that point?
So basically, they regulate the cultivation and the whole raw commodity side of the process. Once the plant goes into such as they start doing mechanical drying, chopping, cutting, things like that, start processing into different commodities. Once the processing starts to happen, we get involved. That's where CDPH comes into play. As long as it is a raw commodity and a cultivated product, it stays on CDFA side. So California Department of Food and Agriculture, that's what it stands for. Yeah.
Okay, what about use of the, like smoking use of the products? Where does that go?
So that is on the inhalable side. So right now we're in the process of actually that's additional regulation we're going to develop for inhalables, so smoking flower and the we right now that sale is prohibited because we do not have regulations for them. So once the regulations come into play, that's when that that part will be legalized. So right now, the only thing legally that can be legally made and sold is for manufacturers to be sold outside the state of California. So inhalables can be manufactured here, but sold outside the state of California. They cannot be sold here. So until we have regulations in place.
Okay, and then what side of the line in the regulatory system do inhalables fall onto? Are they Department of Ag or is that, I mean,
It's under us. It's under us. We had to, that's a new license we had to create because that is something we do not regulate. Inhalables we do not regulate. So anything that's inhalable will come under our jurisdiction. So we will inspect and enforce AB 45 at those companies.
Great, thank you. Okay, so colleagues, I would love to, Amir, if you're assuming you're willing to entertain questions here, I would open it up so we can learn from what's going on in California.
Definitely.
Questions? Rep. Morgan.
Thank you, Rep. Marsh. Amir, thank you so much for your information. I'm not always wanting to follow what California is doing, but it is one of those things that when it comes to cannabis, our states are very linked, especially in the green triangle of growing. I'm from Southern Oregon, which Grants Pass, which is the heart of some of the best cannabis in the world. I'm told, as I've never consumed. But when I hear you talking about the products and process, it sounds like you're taking cannabis as a whole plant. You're not breaking it down into if it's created for medical purpose, if it's created for recreation purpose, or if it's hemp derivative. You're looking at it as the plant as a whole. Is that correct?
So we're going with the definition of industrial hemp. So industrial hemp falls under CDPH's authority. So California Department of Health Public's authority. So anything less than 0.3% THC content. Okay, so once the plant is labeled industrial IH, that's what comes into our jurisdiction. If it's higher than 0.3%, we have a whole separate department. So it used to be part of CDPH, so Department of Cannabis Control. And about a year ago, it became its own department. So it pulled all the different regulatory agencies that were spread out, brought it under one umbrella. So prior to that, cultivation of cannabis used to be under CDFA. So brought it under DCC, Department of Cannabis Control. Manufacturing used to be under CDPH. It brought it under DCC. The distribution and warehousing and testing and enforcement used to be under Department of Consumer Affairs. It brought it under DCC. So now that is all under one department. They handle anything that is above 0.3% or designated as marijuana. So that goes to that side of the house. Anything that is labeled as industrial hemp with approved or with testing is what falls under CDPH's jurisdiction for manufactured products.
May I follow up?
Sure, go for it.
Thank you. Okay, so I heard you say that Delta H is not permitted. And that's under the industrial hemp. That's one of the things that we are looking at, that in Oregon right now we have banned the not distribution, but basically the distribution of Delta 8 in Oregon. You mentioned coming up next is serving sizes and age limits. I'm hearing in some of the discussions we've had in task force that you can have 0.3 of a, whatever, the 0.3 THC, but based on serving size, you can still have somebody that is greatly impacted and by the effects. And so based on serving size and even looking at age appropriate for that, where are you guys looking for what guidelines you'd be, how to determine that? Have you gotten that far in the process yet?
So one of the things that AB 45 did, it didn't just set the limit for the plant, it set the limit for extract, and it set the limit for final form product. So final form product meaning finished product. So for the extract, it set the limit at 0.3%. So that kind of sets that's where it's really controlled. So the extracts are less than 0.3%. I mean, yeah, you can have a pot unless somebody consumes a whole lot of it. In a final form product, based on the serving sizing that we're going to come up with, there should be really not much there for intoxication because the extract themselves are limited to 0.3%, less than 0.3%. Now, I understand in some states that limit is not set for concentrates, where you're going to have a higher level of THC in them. And that's where you have a lot of variation in final form products. So maybe that will help us because it's a brand new program. We haven't interacted much with it. We don't know what is going to come our way as we move forward. But THC, delta 8 THC is a concern because what's happening is, yes, the advertising for less than 0.3% delta 9, but delta 8 I'm seeing being advertised on labels, and it's in the large quantities. So those are the products we're going after.
Brent.
Thank you. To Rep Morgan's point, I think I'm curious, Amir, if you have a total package language, which is something we've talked about before, being for the 0.03 amount. Is that a total package, or I think is that something that's thought about in California as far as being able to control? That's the problem, is you get a certain amount weight of edible that could have a lot more than a per milligram weight. Couldn't it simply be solved with a per package language?
Yeah, so that is something we're going to develop in our regulations actually. So it sets the limit for final form products, so the finished product at less than 0.3%. But once we develop the serving sizes and the age limit, that's where we're going to define how much you can have per package based on how many serving sizes are there.
Right. Yeah, I think that would be a good idea. And then I'm curious on, and sorry if you may have chalked on this a little bit, as far as individual practices at the facilities, is that something you're overseeing as you would any other food product manufacturing facility? It's pretty much the same way as the intent.
Yep. So what we did was, as part of, not only we developed trainings, inspection tools and trainings for AB 45 related enforcement, we also modified our existing inspection tools to capture any of the IH operations. So any additional question that we need to ask, any additional attention that we had to pay for other additives that are normally not included as approved food additives under the federal law. So we're paying more attention to those commodities or those ingredients.
So products that specifically come out of California. And I guess the follow-up question would be, what is your outlook right now? And this has come up in our team before, of how to control products that are coming out of California into California to meet those same standards. What are you guys doing about that?
Yeah, that's a difficult one because the law did not prohibit IH products from coming in. We only regulate the companies that are manufacturing here in California. So that is the difficult part. But it did give us the enforcement authority. If it's sold here or it's distributed here, we can take enforcement actions. So that's where for cause investigations we can conduct. So if we find a distributor that's bringing product in that's violative, then we can take enforcement actions. And that's basically what we're doing. So we're going to be looking at products with delta 8s, delta 10s, anything that's higher than or has any cannabinoids that are not allowed in state of California, or any derivatives that are not allowed in California.
And are you looking directly at the wholesale level, or do you think you're also going to be doing some compliance stuff at the retail level? Where are you guys seeing that to be the focal point?
Wholesale level. So that's where our authority is.
Yeah.
At the
Before it
retail
goes
level, we're going to work with the local health departments. Basically, let them know, hey, this is what's going on at your whatever, wherever they're adding the products to the finished foods. We'll just refer it to them. Wholesale level, that is our authority. So that's where we'll be doing our enforcements.
Got it. Okay, thank you very much.
Steve Merckx.
There we go. Sorry, I can work with my cursor. Hey, Mayor, thank you for being here. And so he said the wholesale level. I think you got to my question a little bit there. That's the level you're enforcing at, so you can't really get back to the manufacturers. The wholesaler is going to really have to take on the responsibility for, in your system, of knowing what they're bringing in the wholesale before they move it out. And what kind of a fine or authority do you have at that level?
So let me just explain the wholesale aspect a little bit more. So it's just not wholesale, it's wholesale and manufacturers. So that is all under our authority. So any manufacturing for wholesale is under our authority. So can you repeat your question the second part of your question real quick?
Well, just how do you, what your fine authority looks like, or how that takes place on the levels of?
So our fine authority, so as I talked about our enforcement, so it didn't only give us the authority to do embargoes, seizures, revocation, and suspension. It also gave us the authority to impose any fines that we already have existing in our current laws for foods and drugs and medical devices. So if we find products such as drugs and medical devices, we can do the same enforcement. So our fines vary from $1,000 per violation to $5,000 per violation based on how they're advertising it. And our embargo fines can be up to $10,000 per day per violation. But as far as the individual violations are concerned, it varies from 1,000. But if they start claiming their products to be organic, the fine can jump up to $5,000 per violation. Because IH in the state of California, at least as of now, is now recognized as an organic product. So if they start to claim organic on it, then they're violating the organic law. That ups it, that's considered here mainly like consumer fraud. So ups it to $5,000. Normal penalties are $1,000 per violation per day.
Good. I don't want to take you off topic, but I might need to consult with you on multiple violations that go out of the same packaged product and have you cap or charge that. We've had some packaging incidents that I don't feel like we got equity in the way we keep charging those as they roll up between small and large companies and otherwise. But did I hear you correctly that on behalf of the state of California that you're going to license Oregon producers if they wanted to bring product into the state for
extractors? So the law mandated that, and that's a very interesting language. How it gets enforced is going to be interesting because I mean it's basically going to, if the manufacturers want to use extract from out of state, they're going to have to work with those extractors to get them approved and licensed. So I think that's the route is really going to work out instead, because otherwise, you know, traveling out of state trying to do enforcement in another state is going to be, it's very So
very well. I actually appreciate that, especially given the way we do alcohol laws and how we don't actually touch out of state very easily, right? We're independent and it makes it very hard. So Brent Kenyon will have to get a license with you if he's going to product into California under existing law there, which just highlights the importance of how between states with these products, and given the propensity to I don't want to use to corrupt the products with THC and other things and synthetics. If somehow we can have some level of handoff between manufacturers and states where we know that we meet Farm Bill and our state standard.
Yeah. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if this specific component of the law gets changed. And it's similar to how the source is set up. So if the cultivated product is coming in, the requirement is just making sure that there's an approved IH program and they're licensed in that particular country or the state. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if it's this is changed in the same manner for the extracts, but for now they have to be licensed here in the state of California.
Other questions?
If I can ask one more in this series, and then I'll
Oh,
get
sure,
off.
go for it. Yeah, go.
So you said they had to be tested at the standards, right? You take it in at 0.3, right? What's your regime of testing underneath it that you're willing to look at, and how do you know that when you get the products?
I don't think I understood your question. So you're talking about the THC testing or the contaminant testing?
How do you look at the COAs that labs are doing as it comes in? Are you trusting those labs that are certified doing that result for hemp? Is it coming out of the field? Do you do are you contemplating final packaged product testing?
Yeah. So the COA has to accompany the extracts to the processor. So when we license them and they say this is the company that provides the extract, our staff are looking at the COA. The COAs are actually pretty lengthy. They're not simple COAs. Normally in the food industry, the COAs are only like a page or 2 pages, and they're not as extensive. When it's for cannabis, the COAs are like 6 to 7 pages because they're not only they have to list or required to test for all the cannabinoids and THC. There's a standard of contaminants they have to test for. So that and when the COAs come in, they come from the labs and they list the accrediting agency. So that accredits them according to 17025. So if you go to those accrediting agencies' website, they list who they have certified under their authority. So you can verify that way. Now, if they are a DCC licensed lab that is doing the testing, then we can simply go to Department of Cannabis Control and say, hey, is this lab licensed by you? And since there are so few of those labs, the ones that are operating in California, majority of them are licensed by DCC because they're not just testing for industrial hemp, they're also testing for cannabis because the standards are pretty much the same. So it makes it easier for us to verify other than what is coming from outside of California. So the source, the cultivator plant is coming in from outside of California. Then we look at the accrediting agency and their certification and see if they're licensed or they're accredited according to 17025, because that is listed on the COA in addition to all the requirements.
So Courtney.
Thank you. Yes, Amir, I wanted to follow up on what Steve had asked. So I just want to clarify the licenses are just for the out-of-state licenses are just for manufacturers bringing in concentrates or extracts into the state for other manufacturers. And it's not a product registration or anything like that. Or it's not for other types of materials, just that concentrate and extract.
Just for the extract, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions? Brent, you got more questions?
Brent has his hand up. So.
Yeah, I actually thanks, Chair Marsh. Amir, we actually passed a piece of legislation with help from Chair Marsh and of course OLCC to allow cannabis licensees to produce hemp products in our system so we can use our same facilities. And now we have a vessel to send those out to the general public as a hemp manufacturer would. Is there anything like that in California now? Or
no.
Is it still separate for you folks?
Yeah, it is different here. The extraction and manufacturing equipment is exactly the same. You know, extraction processes are exactly the same between IH and cannabis. But the difference here in California is right now under the current structure, you cannot have both operations under the same roof, in the same facility. Well, you can have it on the same roof. You just can't have it. You can't do it on the same line because they can't get two licenses for the same operation. So that's a difficult part here. If you're an IH extractor, that means you're an IH extractor. If you're a cannabis extractor, then you're a cannabis extractor. That's the way the model is set up right now. Can that change in the future? I'm thinking that most likely it will, because right now a lot of these operators, they're extracting both. They're extracting cannabis and IH. And since we just started the process, we don't have all the applicants applying yet. So we'll find out how many are there that are doing dual, extractions. Because I know under the cannabis laws, you can only produce for cannabis. You cannot produce for anybody else.
I think it's a good idea to move towards perhaps there. I think what we saw was the ability where we spent millions of dollars developing a facility, and I didn't want to have to go out and build another one so we can participate in the national hemp market to make some hemp products we already make. So we can make hemp products and sell within our cannabis system also. But this allows us to make those products and with some regulations, send them out potentially to California or, other places where we want to market those. So maybe something to look for down there.
Most likely will change. I totally see that changing because initially under the cannabis law, IH was prohibited in all of the cannabis products. You could not add any derivative from IH into cannabis. With AB 45, that's one change that it made. It allows IH derivatives to be incorporated. Like if you're a cannabis operator, you can buy IH derivatives and incorporate. So since that's been allowed, I'm thinking there's going to be additional changes coming that's going to change that structure as well for the manufacturers or the extractors, where they'll be able to do both. So
great. Thank you. Thank you very much.
But extractor from outside, that's not the requirement for extractors outside of the state. If they're producing and don't want to send in IH extract, they just need to license that component of it.
Courtney.
Yeah, 2 follow-ups. I just wanted to confirm that you said that hemp products are not tracked in California. Is that correct?
They're not tracked.
Okay.
There's no track and trace. The only tracking is a lot with the C of A and approved paperwork from the approving agencies.
Okay. And then when you are doing the licensing for the out-of-state manufacturers that are bringing in the concentrates and extracts, are you looking at their manufacturing practices, or are you just looking at the material that's brought in, or what exactly are you looking at?
Right now, it's a virtual inspection, basically. It's not an in-person inspection. So we are going through the same criteria that we'll have for the in-house or in-state extractors. So because the standards are the same, they have to meet the same requirements, testing requirements, GMP requirements. So we're doing a virtual inspection, basically, kind of like a telephone inspection. And that's all that's being done, nothing else.
Okay, but you are looking at GMP certifications?
Well, we're asking those questions. We're asking those questions, but there is no GMP certification. Because we don't accept third-party certifications. There are different type of third-party certifiers, right, that companies use. We don't accept those.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Other questions? Steve.
So I just want to follow up to understand. So you get the COAs, extracts, let's say someone who's ever processed the final edible and that final package, the testing that's associated with what's made there, how you know that, you just got standards going, goes at some labs. Do you do final product testing for the packaged product? And who does it? And what are the requirements on that testing versus what comes into your system?
So the standards for testing are the same for the final form product, finished product, as they are for the extracts. So the same standards. And whoever manufactures the finished final product, basically in a consumer pack, Retail pack has to get it tested for the same standard. So making sure the THC is less than 0.3%. And also test for all the contaminants. Also test for all the cannabinoids that they're advertising on their product, such as CBD or any other cannabinoids they want to advertise for. So all those standards are the same for the finished product as well as the extracts themselves. So same standard. So if they bring in an extract, they got to have the testing for it, same standards. Once they produce the finished product, get it tested from an ISO accredited lab for the exact same standards.
And you can, some way on the packaging, this lab did all of these products and certified the COA for all of those products across all these tests.
Yep. So the CO base is supposed to link to the batch that's listed on the product, and then that's how you kind of do the trace back.
Thank you.
Other questions? Very impressive what you're doing down there. Sounds very,
Work.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah.
I think it would be interesting to shift for just a minute to our system. We have Steve here. Do we have somebody here from Department of Ag? Lauren, are you here?
I am, and I also have Sunny with me and our assistant director Sandel, and I'm not sure if we have our hemp manager, but we do.
I think the question I'm interested in personally is whether or not we could better divide responsibilities in the regulatory system in the state, sort of similar to what's going on in California, but we have not involved public health to that extent. We've really put more of the responsibility for the regulatory system on OLCC. But that division between what's grown and then the agency that takes full responsibility for regulating the human safety issues and the market seems like it makes a lot of sense. And I'm just wondering, I'd love responses about that from both Lauren and his team and from Steve. Is there something we should look at here in terms of the division of regulatory responsibilities?
Marcia, I was actually thinking about that as Amir was talking. And Amir, I think you know our staff. I think you and Sunny and Rusty have talked. Yeah.
Yes. I've spoken with both. Yeah.
Great. Because so Amir's not new to us, and that's great that we've shared that information. So thank you for that, Amir, and thank you for today. And hopefully our staff have helped you, and you've helped our staff, I'm sure. One of the things that I think would be helpful, Representative Marsh, is whenever you look at states around this issue, some states have food processing and that in their public health. Some have it's in their departments of ag. And so we got to make apples to apples. And Amir, you can help me in California. I think California Department of Ag does meat, poultry, and some. And then I think the health does the food processing. Have I got that right, Amir?
That is correct. So CDFA does meat, poultry, eggs. They do all of those and the raw commodities. Okay. So anything that has less than 2% or similar to how FDA and USDA kind of divides up, between the meat and non-meat products, and anything to do with processing comes to our side.
So then in Oregon, ODA has all of the food regulations, including the food processing, working with FDA. So that's a little bit different than California. Public health in our state does all of the restaurants. And that, I'm going to sit right there and I'm going to eat it. That's how I tell people. And then we do primarily, I'm going to go buy it and take it home. That's how that, and Andre can help if I got that a little bit wrong, but that's how I explain it to people. So that's a little bit different with how California is structured. I think as far as what we're talking about here, it would probably be more OLCC as a partner than our public health, but I don't know, Steve, you can help me here with that division. You answered, and then Sunny, because you've talked to Amir, and then maybe you could help on some of that too. But as far as division of work, I mean, it's what makes sense, obviously, and who has kind of what in the wheelhouse and how that is separated that way. We do GMP certifications on our side at ODA. I know Amir was talking about the third party. We have those third party certifications here in our state too. And you have to, it's kind of a weird structure because sometimes you have to certify the certifier who certifies that certifier. And you wonder where that stops on that. But those are my initial thoughts, just to kind of line up who's doing what. Certainly, we don't regulate to anything really like hemp is today. Canola is the closest as far as registering acres, but that stops there. And Department of Ag is more about growing than it is some of the other parts of, and we talked about that with the CBD. And when it gets into the, is it a food? Is it a medicine? What is it? Right? That whole issue there. It sounds like California has defined the CBD stuff, particularly in food ingredients, better, including the Delta 8. As I understand, that's not allowed at all as an ingredient, is what I heard Amir say. So those are my initial thoughts. Sunny came on camera. Sunny, do you have any thoughts about that, or Steve?
Yeah. Good afternoon. I'm Sunny Summers, Senior Policy Advisor to the Director at ODA. I think the things that I heard that might be different in California is rather than just including anything derived from hemp as a food item, which we've done in Oregon from the very beginning, they kind of created a new program within their Department of Public Health. And what they have that our food safety program doesn't have is the packaging and labeling piece. And so they're not necessarily doing anything that we aren't doing for the most part in Oregon. It's just that food safety stayed with ODA's food safety program. And like I said, has been that way for both hemp and marijuana from the beginning, but through House Bill 3000 and conversations that we've been having in this task force, some of that packaging and labeling we don't have in Oregon currently. And we've talked about where do we put that? So I feel like we're kind of at the same point in some ways. California just decided to kind of reinvent food safety for hemp specifically over here, whereas Oregon didn't, but now we're having to reinvent packaging and labeling, which usually is done at the federal level and goes along with that food safety piece. The other thing is the restriction to prepackaged and shelf-stable foods in California. We do allow, hemp cookies in a jar that aren't packaged here in Oregon. That there's no prohibition on that. And as long as they can find a process authority, they could do canned items or, some of those other higher risk products, just as any other food safety. We have the authority through House Bill 3000 to limit or prohibit things like Delta 8 in food items, but OLCC has already prohibited their sales. So it's kind of moot in that regard, but we do have that through statute through ODA as well. So I think it's the packaging and labeling piece really that's kind of different, and just which program area it's housed in.
Steve, what's your observation?
Let me just ask Sunny one part of the question, Sunny, while you're there, because on the food safety piece, how would you describe? Sorry, I lost my train of thought when you went off camera. I was trying to connect up in our system compared to theirs, right? The licensure piece they have, right? You have different licensure off those pieces for food safety. And
yeah,
and the extractors is a permitting piece, or does it go that went? Because I think that's a feature that's very clearly definable, right? About the licensing and the way they do the standards around those.
If you are making an extract or concentrate that's later going to be a food ingredient, you have to have a food safety license in Oregon.
Right.
So, and then if you're making that food ingredient, you have to receive the ingredient from an approved source. And so I think that's similar to what they're doing in California. They would also say that if something came out of another state, while we don't have the statutory requirement for licensure, we would say, who licensed you in California, and is it comparable? Is it a food safety regulatory agency within that state that does that? Otherwise, we would not consider it an approved source as a food ingredient in Oregon.
I was just checking out. I was making sure I got that as a. You know, I think the feature that we'd like to, or that I think is a responsibility someplace, and how it fits Oregon being a little different, and we look at it is really, how do we make sure that we have well-tested products for consumables, and that the package and the product inside the package reflects the contents through testing. And if you look at that, that's kind of what our system does at the top side, from sort of processor upward with metric can connect that. It can track and trace. We can put, we have hemp products, right, in our system that have packaging requirements. It'd be a little different to look at in terms of what we might do for symbols, and for the open market side, what might need to be on the package as opposed to for those products that travel in our adults use stores. It does seem like we get the features of the protection that they're trying to get there for the consumables, reflecting the final product going to market. The thing that I would hope, if we run it through that system with a little more, slightly more traceability on the consumable side upward, including pets, is that then hopefully California might have the rigor and strength to say, oh, we'll accept the Oregon product that went through this, and they won't have to, Amir won't have to come up here and license Brent Canyon, right? As we take those consumable products over, and they'd know, and we'd have some kind of way to handshake that product into your system, and that would be acceptable. But I see that basically from that point, that's where OLCC system could be helpful, as guided by, the standards that we have with our certifications and otherwise, which, Andre and his authorities help give us in moving that forward. And Andre, I don't know if you brought, this might be also a weigh-in for you here.
Well, thanks, Steve. I mean, generally the move recently has been to transfer some of the authority away from public health to OLCC. So recently it is, the packaging and labeling is now completely with OLCC, where we held some of that rulemaking authority before. And then we still retain, testing standards and rulemaking ability there. So, I guess I'm agnostic on how we would want to set the system up. Whatever works the best for Oregon, right? But generally, the tendency over the past few sessions is to take and transfer some of the authority that we had in public health and provide it to OLCC. So we're still retaining testing standards and laboratory accreditation. I think it's interesting that California went with ISO standards and ISO accreditation, where we have a kind of a much more rigorous environmental laboratory accreditation process. And I think that, in hindsight, that the ISO standards would have been better for us from the beginning. But I think now that we're so entrenched in ORLAP type accreditation, I think that laboratories are comfortable with that, and any changes would they'd probably have some questions and discussions they'd want to have if those changes were made. But generally, I think that the idea has been to take public health out of this kind of product regulation. But then again, I think the agency is willing to accept whatever responsibilities the legislature gives us in the best interests of the state, and making sure that consumers are protected.
Thank you. It seems, when I think about the food safety items that are regulated by Oregon Department of Ag, and then think about this realm of hemp products for human consumption, I think the question is are the hemp products more like canned tomatoes, or are they more like cannabis? To me, that's who has more familiarity with what is a constantly changing realm. And I think that's what makes this so difficult. If this were one stable product and we knew what it was, if it were canned tomatoes are pretty clear. They don't change that much. But it's not like that. It is a realm in which we're seeing constant innovation, constant need to understand what the product is, what the implications might be for the use of any particular ingredient. And it's going to require over time much more diligence in the regulatory system than canned tomatoes, just the nature of it.
Yeah, Representative Marsh, this I actually think you're thinking about it correctly, and you're right. And I'm going to bring up something that's not very popular maybe, but when the legislature considered kratom, nobody could figure out, is it a food? Is it a medicine? What the heck is it? And where does it go? And you heard it defined as all kinds of things. So I think because it is changing so much, you have to decide at what point does it cross, which I think is kind of what California did with their thinking, Amir. At some point, they just said when it gets here and it becomes this, then it goes here. Yeah, and that's where I think we're at. As far as your first question, which I think is a good question, I mean, I'm going to make a general statement just in my deputy seat. When we give agencies programs, you always should look at what agency first has the expertise. Capacity is always going to be an issue with agencies, I think, but which ones have the expertise and which ones are best suited to take on task X. I don't think that's any different here, frankly. And if you don't mind, Representative Marsh, I'd like to ask Amir one more question that's somewhat related to what we're talking about.
Sure, go for it.
Amir, when you have a food safety issue, somebody got sick and you've got reported, how does the system that you have developed, and maybe you don't know yet because it's too new, help you do that trace back and find out where the recall might happen, or are you even that far yet? And I hope nobody gets sick, by the way.
Yeah, no, actually, we already received an illness associated with the product, and it was from intoxication. And what is coming up is Delta 8. Okay, so it is already going down that path. And so the way we're doing enforcement is we collect the sample, of course, and we have our own testing done on the product to see what is in the product, and we take that route and see where the ingredients are coming from. Okay, so that's part of the whole enforcement strategy. So we collect the sample, we analyze those, we do the trace back to the supplier, where the extra is coming from, what the source of the raw material was. That is all tied in with the CO base and the all the distribution and invoices and bill of ladings. So we look at all of that to trace back to where the product is coming from. But testing is a key component of it. So, and we base our enforcement on our own testing and our own assessments.
Great. That's kind of what I thought your answer was going to be, Representative Marsh. The reason why I asked that question is that brings back public health into this discussion in Oregon. We rely, our partnership with public health is if someone gets sick, they go to the doctor and they say, it's something I ate, I think. Public health will go into that person's home, do an investigation, do lots of interviews and questions, and then they go to the refrigerator and go, oh shoot, it's that jar of X. And then they will call us, and then we go looking at the stores and do that. So that's a little bit twist to bring public health back. If I got this right, Andre, that's how we've been doing it for years. So that would be a little bit different on the food side on that piece. And that system has worked well for forever.
I mean, I think an example of where it's not a food item is the E-Valley outbreak, right? Like, so public health was leading the human health investigation side of it. So we're figuring who got sick and where they got sick and why. And then we worked with our partners at OLCC to find products. Some of the products obviously were not from their licensees at all. So then, if it's a food product, then we would work with ODA partners to trace back. But with E-Valley, it was even more complicated because they were some of the products were completely unregulated in some cases.
So you play that same investigatory role with when you in a case where you worked with OLCC as when you work with ODA. You have the role, and it depends on who calls you up.
Yeah, so I mean, we'll always assume the human illness side, right? So we'll always try to figure out what someone's sick with, how they got sick, and where they got it, and then we'll work with our partner agencies to trace back the particular product, which is more their bailiwick than ours. But there's always information exchange and to help each other out and figure and isolate the exposure of concern.
So unless anybody has any other comments or questions, I'm going to exercise the chair's prerogative here and ask Steve and Lauren if you would be willing, and maybe pull Andre into this conversation as well, to go away and look at these questions specifically around items, the regulatory system for items for human consumption. I don't feel like we've solved it yet. I don't feel like we have a system that actually provides, and we may not ever have as comprehensive a system as as Amir is describing in California. Maybe we will, but I don't think we have a system that convinces me that we're actually taking the right that the right agency is in charge of the right functions. So I'm wondering if you would go away and consult with each other and come back to us. We're not meeting. We have a lot of time to think about it.
Use the old hand. Happy to do that. And just in a matter of full disclosure, because now we're, I think, tripping past the line. We did put in a placeholder to work on the consumable items, right, for human consumption, all cannabis, and a sort of a unified system approach there. So we have a vehicle to talk about it. It's not, we need to do this work. So I'm really pleased that you gave us this charge. I think it's the right one for us to go back and do. And I know just from prior court, I'm really happy to be able to work with our partners at OHA and ODA.
Okay, and the regulatory system was a charge of our task force looking at changes to the regulatory system. So I think it's totally appropriate for us to have this conversation here and to be transparent and on any kind of proposals that might go forward.
And you'd probably be looking for a progress report or a proposal.
Well, if there's agreement between the agencies, I'd love to hear what that is. I don't know if you will get to that point. Lauren, is this assignment okay for you?
Yes, and actually, I think I'm gonna have to bring in our food safety staff if that's okay, obviously. But I think the place that we might be able to start is known gaps that I think between our agencies we probably already identified, and get those on the table, possibly if there are gaps, which is Steve's talked about that a little bit. But yes, this is great.
Okay, yeah, we want a system that just makes sense, so that we know when we get to who's in charge at any given point. So great, thank you. And Amir, thank you. That was a tremendously helpful presentation. Really grateful that you came to speak to us. You're welcome to sit through the rest of our meeting, but we can also understand if you have other things to do. Steve?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't need me anymore, yes, I would like to be adjourned.
Sounds like we have some agency people from all over the place who may get back to you with questions. You
Definitely, anytime to assist our sister states.
Thank you, but Steve may have a comment.
It was for Amir. I just want to be clear. Anyone taking bulk extracted oil, CBD oil, across the border to California isn't going to be able to use that in California and transport it somewhere else.
Yes.
The oil you can transport anywhere in the United States. It's what the intended use is going to be. If they bring it here and they say we're going to put it as ingredients, where we're going to run into the issue. They can take the oil anywhere.
Got it. Thank you.
All right.
Great.
Thank you, everybody.
All
Let
right.
me know if you have any questions.
Thanks for being here.
Right.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, task force members, we'll move on the agenda now, and we're going to talk about funding. One of our assignments was to go back to the legislature with a recommendation on funding in an ongoing way for our law enforcement and humanitarian functions. And we thought the best place to start this conversation would be to get a better sense from the Criminal Justice Commission, which just conducted this round of grants that went out statewide for, I think, probably 18 months worth of work to understand what was asked for, what was granted, and what lessons we think there might be out of that to give us an idea of what kind of money would be needed to do this in a future biennium. So we have Ryan Keck here with us from the CJC. Ryan, thank you for being here. And we're hoping that you will tell us what you observed in the grant process and what you think the lessons from that could be for ongoing funding.
Yes, happy to do so. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me here. I do have a couple of slides to share just because I've got numbers that I want to make sure you all have in front of you. But I'll preface by saying this is very preliminary at this stage. As we've just, as you mentioned, Rep. Marsh, begun or concluded the grant awarding process and are now moving into the I'd say the phase in which we can analyze a little better and as a result of quarterly reporting and other information. So apologize as I work through Teams to get my application up. Okay, let's go with this. So if I could just real quickly get a verbal confirmation that you are seeing a slide in front of you.
Yes, you got it.
All right, very good. I apologize. I'm a little blind on folks. So if you have questions, do just speak up and let me know. So again, preliminary projections, taking a look at what we've, as you mentioned, learned or we can deduce from the previous or the most recent grant cycle related to the legal marijuana market enforcement grant. So I guess I'll start with the happy news, which is that we have in fact done so. We completed the first round, or pardon me, the second round of funding as a result of specialized one-time funding that came through both the special session in December as well as the short session earlier this year. Through a process that included a grant review committee as well as the commission itself and its evaluation, we ended up awarding 12 total applicants that was also the same amount of applicants that we received. So the decision through the process was to in fact fund all applicants as opposed to cutting some for the purpose of establishing and or sustaining operations to address both the needs of law enforcement as well as the community-based organizations associated with these operations. And so you can see a large table here that kind of folds in both grant cycles for this biennium. We initially had our roughly $6 million cycle and was awarded to 4 grantees, 3 of which were existing from previous bienniums, and then 1 new one, which was a consortia between Polk and Yamhill counties. And then we added 8 more, no, wrong math, pardon, 6 more counties or law enforcement agencies, as well as 2 community-based organizations. As in terms of what does that mean and where are they all at right now? So the first distributions of money have gone out in July. They'll continue on a quarterly basis through April of this year. From that point then, it doesn't mean business stops. We established project periods that extend all the way into December of 2025 for the purpose of trying to sustain efforts. Both the Grant Review Committee and the Commission acknowledged that taking one-time funding and packing into a one-time time frame presents difficulties and challenges for any and all of the grantees, as opposed to trying to establish something they can stretch as far as possible to do the work that they're doing. It did come at the expense of cuts to the proposals because we were limited to that second round of funding of $26 million and received roughly $38 million worth of requests. So the primary reduction was in the area of personnel. Nearly 70% of the funds allocated as well as asked for were in the category of personnel. And so through a tiered process that was used in the decision-making, funding was for 24 to 30 months worth of personnel and other expenses for the grantees. As I mentioned, our projections are preliminary because first quarterly reports are not due until October of this year. But then from that point forward, each quarter we'll receive both progress data as well as financial data to be able to look back and provide maybe more accurate projections for you all and other entities moving forward. To include in the bills passed earlier this year, we do have 2 reports that we're responsible for that will be issued in January of 2023 or by January 2023. One is specific to this topic, that of funding recommendations or changes, and then the ongoing evaluation of the outcomes of the impacts of these grant programs. So answering the question of kind of projection or what we've learned is it can be a little challenging to get given the status of where we're at. But what we've done is operated under the assumption that the requested amounts that came to us through the process were accurate reflections of the needs of the grantees that we're currently engaged with. So utilizing that is how we've kind of done the calculus that I'll begin to explain to you all moving forward. So first and foremost, oh, I've got a stuck slide, I apologize. There we go. I want to talk about the next biennium specifically. So as one scenario for continued funding is to look at just what was necessary to continue the existing grantees all the way through the biennium. As mentioned, through the grant awarding process, the asks had to be reduced to fit the amount of money that was available for allocation. And as a result, there was roughly $13.5 million left or cut out from their requests. So every one of the grantees is being funded to cover a period of time of at least, pardon me, escapes the date now, but 30 months worth of funding as opposed to the full 42 that was potentially available. But others were, and many of them were cut down to 24 months, so 2 years worth of funding as opposed to a full 3rd year or more. This calculation here does have a bit of an increase from the ask because we did have a couple of grantees who projected costs through the process that were only for 2 years. And so they are currently being funded. Their funding would run out in 2024, like some of the others that did receive reductions. So again, the math together kind of comes to this point. And so this option, if you will, is presented as one to fill the gap of what was requested and carry it through just through 2025. So this number is maybe lower than some of you are expecting, but it's because it's just simply filling the gap. On a broad, to the note that's at the bottom of the screen, this does not afford any additional funding for new programs, new grantees of other CBOs or law enforcement agencies, or any enhancements that might be necessary by either of those entities that are currently funded. So this is just a raw gap fill type of projection. The second projection I'll provide to you would be to look at what we've awarded thus far, and then calculating it based on just 24 months of funding. If we were to just generalize and say, what does a biennium at current service levels cost? This is the projection that we came up with looking at what we've awarded thus far. So that number does go up a bit, but this is still in and of itself 3 times what the marijuana program is currently funded at per biennium. The last projection then is one to look at the requested levels of service. So if we were to award or fund each of the 12 existing grantees at the level of service that they requested through this process for a full biennium, again, generalizing a biennium, not necessarily speaking to 23-25, you see that number goes up to roughly $25 million. Again, this doesn't include the projection of anything additional, so any other grantees that may be interested. We have not heard from any other counties at this point or through the process in terms of interest in getting involved or being funded, although it is early before the next solicitation. We did hear some feedback through the process from community-based organizations that the expedited timeline at which we rolled out this one-time funding may have been a factor in some other CBOs applying for funding. So to try to add or maybe just put some numbers on the table to be played with in relation to these additional funds or new grantees, we did a little look at some of the grant programs that were commensurate in size and or request and what that cost was for a law enforcement agency to start up a grant or a eradication team or something of that nature for a 2-year period of time. We came up to this total you see on the left, 1.9 million. For the community-based organizations, that was much harder to do. The 2 entities that we've funded are vastly different. One is a localized organization that is just serving the Central Oregon and a few areas there and was very focused on what they asked for. And the other was a large statewide conglomerate of roughly 6 CBOs working in partnership to provide direct aid and education related to the humanitarian crisis. So at this stage, it's really challenging to make a clearer, I guess, what does one program cost like we did for law enforcement. So we did just use the number that was on the previous slide in relation to 2 years of funding for CBO programs. And so with that, then you'll see, again, looking under the, I guess, through the lens of just 23-25 specifically, if we were to carry over that gap funding as well as some projections on new funding, we roughly put in 2 new law enforcement agencies just based on the rate at which we've seen new applicants in past biennium, with the exception of the one large increase this past year. And then that funding amount for CBOs, you see we come to a total of roughly $21 million. Kind of jumping to the other end of the spectrum and saving a little real estate on the slide. Skipping to that scenario around a full biennium more generally, what would the requested levels of service cost? So again, carrying forward the existing grantees and their requested levels of service, plus these same projections for new grantees, you see that number does jump up to roughly $32.3 million. What neither of these projections still include are anything around, say, innovations or increases that existing grantees may need. That's just at this stage a little difficult for us to assess. So this doesn't capture, of course, increases in costs due to inflation or otherwise, but it also doesn't capture, say, the savings associated with maybe an equipment purchase in the current biennium that will carry forward and be still be in use in a new biennium. So with that, I'll stop screen sharing so that I can see you all and answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Ryan. I have a question on the humanitarian, the CBO grants. That was $6 million that was handed out. And we are expecting that to last for how long?
Yeah, so we issued $6 million, you're correct, for CBO specifically, and currently it is awarded to them through December of 2025. So the project period extends all the way out to December. There's some clarity probably necessary to say that we generally write a grant, we set a project period to extend beyond the biennium for sake of closing out funds. So realistically, it's intended to fund through the 23-25 biennium, so July of 2025. And
so
again,
you're extrapolating from that to get to the 3.6 million for a full biennium.
Correct, because at this stage they're all being funded for roughly 3 years, so we condensed down.
Okay. Questions about the math or the proposal? We are going to want to make a recommendation as part of our effort, either in legislation or in our final report, or maybe both, regarding a next biennium worth of budget, potentially an ongoing source of funding, although I am the most interested. I think that the biggest question really is asking for the money that we need for the next couple of years. We have the opportunity to also make a recommendation regarding where that money comes from. My sense is that that's a big question that's going to wind up in the Ways and Means Committee, and I don't think we have to be responsible for telling Ways and Means where to find the money that we need. I think we should be responsible for being very clear about what kind of money we need. Happy to visit that question if other people feel differently. But I think our primary mission is to define what we need to do and what are the resources that we need to do it. So Amanda, people are just seeing those numbers for the first time. I'm presuming they are posted someplace or will be emailed to someplace so that people can reflect on it a little bit.
Yep. If Ryan wants to send it to me, I can email it out to members, and then I can also post it on our website with the meeting materials.
Absolutely.
Right. And the choices, again, are What does it take to get everybody through 2025? What does it take what would a full biennium of funding look like? And then there was a third choice. What was the third choice?
It's kind of the opening up space for others. So,
okay,
versus just the 12 that are currently funded.
Are there any, Rob?
Thanks, Representative. Just a real quick note. I agree with everything you said regarding ways and means, and us putting out the numbers that we need. But I did just want to remind everybody, when we were originally crafting House Bill 3000, the original notion was to expand the pre-existing IMM-EGP, the program that Ryan was just talking about, which actually originally got all of its funding off the top. It was basically a skim off the top of marijuana taxes. Why I thought at the time that was important to craft it that way was to provide for some level of potential sustained funding, because it's very difficult to hire law enforcement officers and keep them and retain them if you only have a grant funding cycle of 2 or 3 years. So although I get why this is really going to be a ways and means decision, as it was for 3000 to convert to general fund, if we're really looking at sustained funding and being serious about tackling this problem in the long term, maybe we ought to consider a recommendation to expand the pre-existing IMM-EGP funding source off the top of marijuana taxes. At least that would be my suggestion. And my logic is, I think the first thing we ought to do with marijuana taxes is make all our cannabis programs work first. That's just my pitch.
You're on mute, Representative Marsh.
Am I off? Stuck mute button there. And that's a perspective shared by other people, but not everyone, recognizing that when you put that recommendation out there, I think the risk is that you lose focus on what it is you need, and you wind up in a pit of politics. But it's certainly something we can do. Sheriff Sickler.
Oh, I just wanted to, kind of, I guess, piggyback on what Rob had said about, the funding and how the money will be used over the next few years. Getting employees hired, as was alluded to, can be a daunting task. So I see this lull in money, and then, not maybe using it right away because we're hiring, and then using more. And then the problem, the issue can be the attrition back as the money starts to wean down, meaning if we're planning to use money until, say, December of 2025, I think that's the latest date the money can be used at this point. I have to look at where I might have vacancies within the organization leading up to that point, because once the money falls off and I can't pay for an employee, then the natural thing is that position is cut, and the more appropriate thing to do is to look at where you have natural vacancies within your organization. So you have somebody who retires, and then you need to pull this person back off so you don't have these layoffs. And so I think it's really important we look at long-term sustained funding, as Rob said, and really look at, even beyond the next biennium. I know it can't be binding each year to year, but our goal should be a probably like 10-year funding plan, some sort. So agencies can plan, hire, and then plan for the attrition and still be effective in what we're getting this money to do, which is to eradicate the black market marijuana in the state of Oregon. And so I just think we need to be mindful of that and understand how difficult it is to get these resources up and running. And just about the time everything's starting to go smooth, right now in our current plan is we'll have to start scaling back the teams to make sure we don't have layoffs within our organization. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there and maybe have a bigger discussion at some point about this, so everyone has a good understanding of what it looks like, the hiring times, the ramp up times, the experience that's needed, and then how those things look if we have to peel them back when funding runs out.
Well, I think one of the advantages of the cannabis taxation that Rob described, is that you have that consistency potentially over a longer period of time. You're not arguing about it every 2 years. Tyler.
Correct.
Thanks, Representative Marsh. I just wanted to add one more vote for sustained long-term funding. I wanted to also point out that the funding as it is now is based on 10 county law enforcement teams, and of course there's 36 counties. Well, it's not a huge problem everywhere. It's definitely it's there. I think one of the biggest issues, we've seen the growth in the program with more grantees, and I think it's because they're waking up to the problem in their area. I truly believe that work by some of these grant teams, especially in Southern Oregon, they're the press they're getting around it. I think it's waking people up. I think a lot of counties just realized with this latest funding round that the money was even available. And I think that there's a real unrealized demand out there. And I want to point out that where there's not a grant team, that's where the state police comes in. And right now we're coming in with just 8 detectives statewide. And the costs of this eradication is just mammoth. To give you an idea, a grant team in the northern Willamette Valley that's funded for about 2 detectives and 150% prosecutor just spent 2.5 days eradicating a grow. That small county sheriff's office withdrew everyone from vacation and days off to get the job done in 1 day and ended up doing it in 2.5. So, that's a tremendous burden on the sheriffs. And it's a tremendous burden on their employees. And the only way out of that is more resources to deal with it.
So I think what I would like to do, any other just general comments? I think what I would like to do, given that we had a lot of data there and choices and some calculations that need to be made in light of the balance of the biennium and then the issue over a longer period of time, which would potentially be a different number, is assign this to 2 or 3 people to come back to us to take a deep dive into Ryan's numbers. I'm sure he would be willing to serve as a consultant if necessary, and come back to this group with a recommendation about what our report should contain in terms of both the next biennium and the longer term. Because I think it's really 2 different, the way Ryan laid that out, it's really potentially 2 different conversations. So if you all are willing to do such, let me raise your hand if you would like to volunteer for the job. Brett Morgan, you put your hand up, but you put it up, in fact, before I asked for volunteers, so you don't have to volunteer. Would you like to volunteer, Brett Morgan?
I'm willing. I mean, I'd like to see who else would like to, but I think that being that I'm on the other one with you on the revenue side, it might be good to hear. Besides, I haven't seen Ryan since I was at the academy back in 2015, so it's kind of good to.
So I now I don't know who wants to talk and who wants to volunteer. So I'll go through all of you and ask you. So Rhett Morgan, did you have you had a comment, I think, before you volunteered?
It's okay. I'm willing to, if there's going to be a group coming back with a suggestion, I'll just stick it there.
Okay. Sheriff Sickler, are you volunteering? Okay. And Steve Marks, are you volunteering or talking?
I'm volunteering someone from my organization.
Okay. Brent, are you volunteering or do you have a comment? And
both, yeah. I'd be glad to.
Okay. And Bovet, I'm assuming you're volunteering. And I'm going to ask you, Rob, to pull the group together now that you know who it is. It's yourself, Brent, Steve, or someone from his organization, Rep Morgan, and Sheriff Sickler.
Great. I should note, just for the record, I'm vice chair of the CJC, so I'll probably just want to be a fly on the wall and not do any talking, if that's all right.
Sure. Is that a conflict of interest?
No, it's not really, because I don't get any personal gain from any of this. It's all a volunteer position, but I'll be having to kind of lead the discussion probably on the decision about who to award these grants to, as I did for the last round. So I don't want to put myself in a position where people are thinking I'm lobbying for X, Y, or Z when I have to decide X, Y, or Z, you know?
Well, and I think what we're looking for is the total pot.
Yep.
And then the discussion about how it is allocated is a different discussion, although there's a recognition that the pot may need to be bigger to accommodate more counties in the future.
Gotcha. Yep.
Okay. All right. Thank you. You're all assigned. Thank you for taking that on and coming back to us. That is an important part of our mission here. And with that, then we have a couple of other items that we want to talk about today. The first one is just any quick reports that come from the subcommittee. It's not required, but we do have 3 subcommittees and we're trying to keep track of where they are, areas of agreement, possible legislation or placeholders. So do we have any, our committee chairs, if you have anything you'd like to report? Rep. Morgan, do you have anything you'd like to report for cannabinoids?
Sure, thanks, Rep. Marsh. Some of the things that, one of the topics that was we talked about, I've asked that we bring it back for another day. So I'm not going to report back on that one right now because I don't think we really addressed it thoroughly. But regarding testing and testing requirements and methods of enforcement of testing requirements for cannabinoids, including artificially derived cannabinoids to protect the public health and safety, that topic, there's 3 kind of bullet points. The subgroup all agree to cannabis state-run reference lab would help the regulation of all cannabis sold in Oregon. The subgroup agreed minimum labeling standards for hemp-derived products for human consumption that contain cannabinoids is important for consumer awareness and safety. Some of the members of the group did express concerns about whether current testing requirements are being followed. We do have a meeting tomorrow, and we are going to be having a discussion on the changes to state law to support the regulation of intoxicating cannabis-derived products and artificially derived cannabinoids. The topic that I'd like us to also circle back and address again is the discussion and any recommendations related to sales to minor. And for me, that is kind of part of that total packaging and serving sizes and just total available ones that we didn't really get to that as thoroughly as I think we can. So that's the topic that I'm hoping to bring back another day. We've also been asked to give another couple presentations that we'll try to get scheduled. We didn't have time to get them scheduled tomorrow for a group that has asked us to consider an alternate to tracking. And so there'll be a presentation on that in the future.
Great. Senator Przansky, are you still with us? So Senator may have gotten back to Rob. Do you want to report for law enforcement?
Sure. We're meeting again on, just real quickly, we're meeting again on September 9th. We reached some general consensus about some tune-ups on our search warrant statutes. We had a lot of conversation around 3 additional big issues related to law enforcement tools, such as trackers and pings. We also dealt with penalties and the disparate penalties that don't really work that well because we basically have the same penalties for 18 plants as 18 million plants. So we've got to figure out something there. And then we also talked pretty extensively about cleanup, liability, and leaning. And so what I drafted this week was another long bill. It's 15 sections, and we're going to be talking about it on September 9th. I'm sure a lot of folks are not going to like a lot of the stuff I crafted, but it'll get people's juices flowing, and we can have a good conversation.
Great, thank you. And I'll report just quickly for the Water and Natural Resources Committee. We are interested in pursuing to see if there's anything that we should be addressing regarding illegal wells or wells that have been drilled with a full understanding of the fact that they're going to be serving an illegal market. This is sort of parallel to the bulk water legislation that was passed in the 2022 session, where we said it's illegal to distribute bulk water to someone who's using it for growing of illegal hemp. And we are interested in whether or not there's something else we should be doing about wells that are put in with the full knowledge of the installer, the driller, of how that water is going to be used. So Justin and his team are going to get back to us on that. We also identified a couple of items that we've handed over to the Law Enforcement Committee around suggestions that we received regarding criteria that could be added to the statute that defines what is prosecution, what is possible for prosecution for commercial cannabis. And we handed those comments over to Senator Przansky for consideration by the committee. So we're still moving along. It is not clear with all the work that we did on water in the 2022 session whether we are ready for more legislative proposals, but we're looking at it. Any other comments on subcommittees? Then the last substantial thing on our agenda is, actually, before we leave subcommittees, let me just say, our larger task force is not going to meet again until October. That's after some of the first deadlines for drafting member bills. So over the next month, we will be engaged with staff to start, and Rob, you heard already has a head start on this, to look at drafting in any kind of placeholder bills, or if we have substance, bills with substance that come out of the cannabinoid, the natural resources, and the law enforcement subcommittees. The work that we are doing at the task force level isn't yet defined. That's questions around regulation, the money ask, and then yet to be discussed, the humanitarian labor trafficking issue. So we'll probably just draft some placeholder bills so that we have them ready if we want to use them. So all of that work will be ongoing in September. So, and then we'll come back when we have more meetings in October and start really looking at the contents of those bills. So with that, let's go to updates from the field, because we know that we are trying to regulate an industry that is changing all the time. And we have people on this committee who are out there and observing what's going on. So this is just an open moment for anybody who's in the field to report anything that we might not be expecting or their observations. Looks like Sheriff Sickler may have stepped away. He's often our first reporter.
This is Tyler Rep Marsh. I'm
Tyler, go.
Transition to phone, and I can give a little report for you.
Sure.
So it's been a busy week for outdoor grows in the north half of the state. I'm aware that a lower Willamette Valley grant team took 10,000 plants and made one arrest yesterday. They contacted multiple people out at an outdoor grow. There was a upper Willamette Valley team that I spoke about earlier. They started out on a one-day operation that turned into more like 2.5 to 3 days. They encountered 22 people at somewhere right around 100 hoop houses. Those 22 people were non-English speakers and were exploited and living in deplorable conditions. And I'm aware that that's not the end of this week yet. That there's other activity also with outdoor growth typically seen in Southern Oregon. And that's my report from the field.
Thank you, Tyler. Anybody else have anything? Sunny, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Rep Marsh. I don't see Alan Hansen, so I'm going to report. He is our hemp program manager. We've started, I guess, what you could call kind of Operation Table Rock Light, so to speak, where we've been visiting hemp farms all over the state. Thank you, Director Marks, for your staff's assistance again this year on that project. So far, we've completed the Northwest region, Salem and Eugene. We will start operations in Medford, which will cover Jackson, Josephine, Douglas, and Klamath counties next week. And we anticipate being there for about 4 weeks, and then we'll move up into Central and Eastern Oregon. So far, we've done 59 site visits and we've had 3 failures. One of those failures was clearly an illegal indoor grow, and we've shared that. There were a lot of concerns about the facility itself and worker safety, et cetera. So we've been in contact with that county's code enforcement so they can see what they can do about it. They are the immature plant testing, so we can't take enforcement action based on these tests, but we will be watching those growers that have failed for that to ensure that they do the appropriate pre-harvest testing, and whether they fail that or not. It kind of depends on when they decide to do that testing. And that's what I have from the program manager. Thank you.
Thank you. It sounds like better proportional outcomes than last year so far.
Correct. I am somewhat of a pessimist by nature, and I'm concerned because, you know, it's been the northern part of the state and not the southern part. So we'll see once we've had an opportunity to be in those southern counties if it stays that way.
We have questions for Sunny. Joshua, did you have a question?
No, I was going to do the update for Southern Oregon, but Sheriff Sickler's back, so he's probably better now than I am. He gets to be out there more, or at least can share more than I can with pending cases. So,
Sheriff, do you want to do any report for Southern Oregon? This is conditions on the ground.
Sure. So, you know, our IMET team has been very busy, as Josephine County's team, the equivalent of. We're seeing, you know, plenty of work to be done. So a lot of grows, a lot of black market grows. It's not as pervasive as it was last year, meaning they're not as big or out in the open as they were. So what we're seeing is a bit smaller plots and maybe a little more concealed or not quite as obvious. We have a lot of trash and debris left over from last year. I think many of you have seen the flyover, so the environmental impacts are still there from last year. And that's part of the reason for the legislative piece of cleanup and dismantling that we're asking for in our task force. But yeah, the amount of, say, workers that are being exploited, the number seems to be less per grow, given the fact that grows are smaller. We're still encountering those instances. I think last week we had one, I think with about 25 or so people who were working in that grow, and we're investigating more locations that have similar circumstances. So busy. And I know Joe County, I think they hit 3 or 4 grows last week alone. They're able to operate a little bit faster than we are because they do use a tractor to dismantle the grows. So that is a big piece, and it is an efficiency piece. Sergeant Bechtel was exactly right, talking about how labor intensive it is to dismantle these grows. But in Joe County, when they can run them over with a cat, there's those big grows that take 2.5 days, take, you know, a half a day to do. So that's an important piece of legislation. I think it's also important for the environment as well, given what we have down here. But we will not run out of work this summer or next summer, even though we are still, you know, we're better than we were last year, for sure. But we still have more work than we'll be able to get at.
Thank you. And Brent, did you have a comment on this?
Well, I just want to say, you know, I want to thank Sheriff Sickler for his hard work. I know they've really been out there, and we hear a lot in the cannabis community of kind of how things are going down. And there's definitely a dramatic decrease in people interested in having large grows that are obvious. So we're seeing a lot of that coming out. Unfortunately, the effects of having so much illegal cannabis in the state is affected the market for some time to come. I'm hoping for better turnout this year for people to be able to survive and make money that are in the legal system, but I think the effects are going to be felt for a while. So I do encourage the continued efforts of them. Josephine County, they're doing a great job as well. But we're hearing a lot of it. We've even got I've got a medical clinic where we see several medical marijuana patients over the last 20 years. And we've got people coming back that realize they had 6 plants instead of 4 and want to get into the medical system again and make sure that their 6 or 8 plant gardens are covered. So just recently, you know, I know that's not the focus of law enforcement, but it's interesting to see that kind of piece where people are paying attention. I think we've got a lot of bad actors that now recognize it's not as simple as it was. And I want to applaud ODA for getting out on the ground and using the resources at OLCC that have been provided to work together and kind of tackle these issues. So
Okay.
I think we're going to have a lot better.
Thank you, Brent. I want to just tag something because it's come up a couple of times, that question about cleanup. We talked about this in natural resources, and something we discovered, I want to make sure that everybody is aware of it, is that DEQ has something called the Solid Waste Orphan Fund. It is funded by solid waste providers. It's through tipping, and it is possible that it can be used for hemp sites. We have forwarded that information to Jackson County. And if that's going to go into if there's a cleanup proposal and a legislative and something that we put forward, you're going to want to check out that existing fund to see if it's the right, it's a right or a complementary option for you. Steve.
Well, I just wanted to point out that we had our largest fine in our history against cannabis producer products, Curaleaf. It was $130,000, 23-day suspension, but it was packaging violation, which we treat differently. And I just want to say there was some good critical review of sort of our standards. Gurnian had a story. I'd be the first to say that we've been locked into a cap that we put in ourselves as policy and how we would use our fining authority. I'm not sure that works well between small and large. And the difference in this case was really, even though it was a larger company, they were highly cooperative with us. This is pretty the famous case with the swap of pure mistake THC for CBD and CBD for THC. A lot of the cost of that was resolved in civil matters outside of OLCC, but we don't have that one quite right. That'll be something we probably don't get a chance to really work on refining that rule, the size and the violation until next year. But market for us out there and just one of the challenges that we've got.
Great, thank you. Okay, that brings us to the end of the agenda. Oh, public comment. Do we have any members of the public here who wanted to speak?
We did. We had a Lee Berger signed up to speak.
Oh, Lee, are you still with us? Thank you for your patience. I see you here. So can you add your, since we've inadvertently hit the 5 o'clock hour, can you make your comment in 3 minutes?
Sure.
Okay, you got it.
I certainly can, Chair Marsh. I want to add to the report from the field. Overwhelmingly, the grows historically over the last several years that have been raided by the police are smaller and not the larger ones that they've been publicizing. In terms of the funding issue that you discussed today, my recollection is that the people determined where the funds should go from the cannabis taxes, including that they fund the drug treatment programs occasioned by Measure 110. And I did get an email today from the health department that they finally funded the ones here in the metropolitan area in the Portland Tri-County area. I did receive an email notification about this meeting. I have not received any about the one that I'm interested in, which is the Subcommittee on Law Enforcement. I did observe some of that, and I had specific comments relating to some of the items that were discussed in the bill that Rob is drafting. And I guess I could share, though, Rep. Marsh, that Rob and I had, I think in 2015, updated what is a 20-year out-of-date commercial cannabis offense statute, and it never made it into a bill. But you know, to me, I continue to believe and will continue to advocate to this group and to the legislature that it's a tremendous waste of resources to have police officers spend days chopping down marijuana plants. and that if you want to penalize people who are abusing workers or who are damaging the environment, then create crimes that do that. But the notion that cultivating marijuana should be a felony was rejected by the people. And it's now currently, again, in this 20-year-old law, it's a presumptive prison sentence. Perhaps one solution might be to make it a presumptive probation sentence unless aggravated by these factors that the task force is concerned with. So the question I have, I hope you can help me with this, Chair Marsh, is should I just direct those comments to Senator Przanski, since he chairs that subcommittee, as the first question? And then the second question is, how can I receive notice of the, I heard Rob say it was going to be on the 9th, but I have other things scheduled on the 9th, and I just, how can I find out when the subcommittee hearings are going to be besides checking the OLCC site daily?
So in terms of providing input, I think my counsel on that at this point would be that is an active conversation in the law enforcement committee. So I think providing your input to Senator Przanski is probably the most effective thing you could do right now. In terms of notification of the subcommittee meetings, Amanda, can you speak to how those are noticed?
Yeah, we normally, when we post them on our website, we normally send out a notice, but I can look back and check and see if maybe we didn't do it with law enforcement or see what groups it went to. But I can go ahead and double check on that for you, Lee.
Thanks, Amanda. I appreciate it. And thanks everybody for your good work. It was an interesting session to listen to today. And I certainly learned some things. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Lee. And thanks for your comments, and thanks for holding out till the end of the meeting. Our next meetings are October 7th and October 21st. So we're going to have 2 meetings in October. We will have some at least bare bones legislation that we will start to fill in and review over the last couple of months of the year. So we'll be making progress in the next month, and our subcommittees will be meeting in the next month as well to figure out what it is that they want to start thinking about for legislation. And with that, Amanda, anything else? Have I missed?
Nope. Perfect.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you all, and see you in subcommittees and in October. Bye.